1997.
Iowa
Thank you
Director
for
on
being
the
here
National
today.
DNC's
Thank you.
Veterans and Military Families Council and the Iowa Democratic Caucus's Adjutant, Secretary.
I'm Ron Healy, and I'm the current Iowa Veteran Caucus Chair. I'm glad to be here today. Thank you.
As we begin, I'd like to just take a couple of moments to remember that today is the 18 years and 2-day anniversary of the start of the longest war in U.S. history. It continues today. Today, as we stand here, we have boots in the ground in harm's way in many places across the globe.
That's wrong.
We have Gold Star families grieving. We have Blue Star families anxiously waiting. We have friends and families that are hoping. Please remember the 22 a day, the fallen, and all who care for them. Please remember. Please join me, if you will, standing if you so choose. Place your hands over your heart if you'd like. If you prefer to take a knee, you will not offend this combat veteran. Veterans, present arms.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There you go. Thank you, Ron. Thank you. Great.
All right,
so
for
much
any
for
of
being here.
one in this room who doesn't
know
know
us.
me, I'm Gary Hart. I'm
Thank you,
the
Joe.
chair of the Trumbull County Democratic Party.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank
it's
you.
my honor today to introduce our special guest. Most of you probably know her biography, so I'm not going to read it off, but some of the high points are the youngest person ever elected to the Hawaii legislature
Yeah.
at the time. Also served on the Honolulu City Council and is in her 4th term in the United States House of Representatives from Hawaii. Also a combat veteran, Major Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank
Please
you.
welcome.
Thank you so much, Gary. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Where's your wife, Gary? There she is. I want to say thanks to Gary and Den for all of your help in organizing and putting things together for us here today, and thanks for your introduction. I really appreciate it. I want to say thanks. I don't think she's here. Shelley from the Lawrence Community Center for providing us with this space to be able to talk today. And I want to say thanks to my friends Joe and Ron. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your incredible leadership that you provide all across this state, everywhere you go, being a voice for our brothers and sisters in uniform, both those who have laid the uniform down, and as you mentioned, so appropriately, those who are continuing to serve in harm's way today. Can we please give them a round of applause, please? Thank you. Love you guys. Thank you so much. What a great note to start on, though, to talk about what is at stake, why we're all gathered here. And I'm thankful to all of you for making the time to come and join us today. But starting with the remembrance of those who are continuing to serve, those who, unfortunately, we've seen in just the recent weeks, soldiers and service members who have paid the ultimate price in Afghanistan specifically. And starting with the Pledge of Allegiance, remembering what it is that unites us all. We don't have a whole lot of time today, so I'm going to keep my remarks relatively brief, and then I really want to hear what's on your mind and answer any questions that you have. But I think it's important that we start on the tone and the message that Joe opened our conversation up with. What is it that brings us together as a country? What does it mean to be an American? Why do we pledge allegiance to this flag? What does it stand for? In a time where we as a country are facing such incredible divides, we're seeing how people in positions of power, whether they be politicians or people of big influence, they try to tear us apart. They try to put us in one box or another and pit one group against the other. We're seeing a lot of this in Washington happening with the hyper-partisanship. We have two political parties who are very powerful and are more interested in defeating the other than actually saying, hey, who are we as Americans? How do we come together and work together for the well-being of our country and the people in our country who are facing incredible challenges, who are struggling, living paycheck to paycheck, just trying to make ends meet, make sure they've got a roof over their heads for their family, concerned about a healthcare emergency that may come, but they don't have the money to pay for it, thinking about the future for our kids. What kind of future will we leave for them? How will we help equip them to be successful in this quickly changing global community and economy? There are so many very real issues and challenges that we face. But so long as we remain divided as a country, so long as we see this tribalism continuing, we will never get to that place where we're actually solving the root cause of so many of these problems. Coming together, unifying our country, recognizing that we shouldn't be afraid to sit down and have a conversation with someone who disagrees with us. And that this unity can only happen when we come together in the spirit of what we in Hawaii call aloha, which really means respect. There's a reason why people think aloha means hello or goodbye. Some say it means I love you. There's a lot of confusion about what it actually means, but we use this as a greeting because of what it really means. And what it means is I come to you with an open heart. I come to you with respect, that I recognize that we are all connected. We are all brothers and sisters. We are all children of God. And then this inspires us to see past all of the things that are used to divide us, all these superficial labels, and allows us to be able to build that foundation of respect, to heal those divisive wounds, and see each other for who we are so that we may come together and move forward together. You know, at every one of our events we have, you may have noticed if you signed in here, we have copies of our Constitution and Bill of Rights. There are things that are too often forgotten. In our day-to-day discourse, certainly in Washington, we see abuses of our constitutional rights and abuse of talking about Afghanistan. We've seen over time this erosion of the constitutional responsibilities that both Congress has as being the body that the Constitution says must declare war, and an abuse of power from the executive branch across administrations, bypassing Congress, not getting that congressional declaration and going and waging wars. So what are these wars? What is this cost of war that Joe is alluding to? He's talking about a very real human cost, a human cost that is paid for by every single one of us who has worn the uniform or continues to wear the uniform, those who pay the ultimate price, those who were able to make that long trip home but come home with both visible and invisible wounds. Those experiences, those memories, they never really go away. But there's a cost to this constant regime change war status that we've been in for so long that is paid for by every single one of us. Every single one of us. Something that hardly ever gets talked about, but it should be, because it's at the center of our ability to be able to say, okay, we've got a limited amount of taxpayer dollars and resources. Where are those going? How can they best be used to serve the needs of our people? This is the kinds of conversations we should be having. We'll put it towards healthcare, we'll put it towards education, towards infrastructure, towards the basic needs that we have. But instead, what we've seen since 9/11, 2001, over $6 trillion of our taxpayer dollars has gone to pay for these wasteful, counterproductive regime change wars that have not only proven to be so costly to our men and women in uniform, but they've actually undermined our national security. They've strengthened terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They've caused a great devastation and destruction in the countries where we wage these wars, and we see that in the years that pass, it's not only the wars themselves, but it's the ongoing nation building in these other countries that follows that. Meanwhile, we have folks here in our country who can't drink the water that's coming out of their taps because it's poisonous and toxic. You know, we have communities who are struggling because of failing infrastructure, whether it's waters or sewers, you know, septic tanks. We have farmers who are struggling because of failing levees. You've seen this in some of the communities we visited here in Iowa. In Pacific Junction, we went and we were helping some of the families who were trying to recover from the floods and the failed levees that they saw there. And they were being told it may be years before those levees are rebuilt, leaving them wondering, where do they go? What do they do? There are very real challenges and needs that we need to address here at home. And so our foreign policy, the cost of war, the most important responsibility that the president has to serve as commander-in-chief is central to every single other one of these issues that we face. It is central. You can't separate it. So unlike what some people may believe, they say, oh, you know, foreign policy is just one issue. Why do you talk about foreign policy so much, Tulsi? It's because, yes, I've personally seen the cost of war, the terrible high human cost. But as a member of Congress, now I've served for nearly 7 years on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security Committee. I understand very deeply the importance of our national security and the cost and consequences of these decisions that are made. So I'm running for president to bring about a sea change in our foreign policy, to bring these values and principles of service above self to the White House, to our presidency, restoring the principles of honor and integrity and respect to the presidency, and to walk in on day one prepared to lead as commander-in-chief, ending these wasteful regime change wars, working to end this new Cold War and arms race that we're in with escalating tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, more money going to build more of these nuclear bombs and missiles, and instead redirect our resources back towards serving the needs of our people here at home. This is the change that I'm seeking to bring about. This is why I'm here asking for your support to join me. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's good to see you again. You are dressed in, he was at our town hall yesterday and he was looking sharp yesterday, just like I like the addition of the Tulsi shirt underneath.
Well, I didn't realize you were selling
That's an
things in
upgrade.
Washington, so that's why
Thank you. It's good to see you again. Who'd like to share some thoughts or have a question? Yes, ma'am. We'll start with you in the back.
So what you're talking about is one reason why it came was the high cost of the wars, et cetera, which should have never been started anyway.
That's right.
So I was in the Iowa Army National Guard, and we have deployed, I know with Iowa, we had a board. You know, we continue to deploy our reservists, which should be here for Homeland Security, not the Army Reserves. The Army Reserves is put together to fill in, not the National Guard. But also with the National Guard, what I find really a lot of us did was, since 1986, we'd been talking about being able to get our pensions and our other benefits that we get if you put your 20 in, you know, at age 55 instead of 60. Well, here it is 2019, it is still 60 years old.
Yep.
You know, the bean counters are counting on X amount to not survive till
That's
age
right.
60. Then, like, I put in my 20.
What did you do in the National Guard here?
Well, actually, I was in communications, radios, and then I switched to dental corps.
Got it.
So I had a young family at the time, and I managed to put in my 20. Now, out of that 20, 15 years of it was Desert Storm ongoing until retirement. And we all know in that time, the U.S. government needs to know where I am every minute of every day in case you get the call. And so I thought after 20 years I'd be called a veteran. I am not. So it was like, thank you for your service. Now here's your kick in the ass as you go out the door. So, you know, since I don't get veteran status, I don't get veterans points. And I've been trying to work for the National Park Service, well, for federal government. And so when you fill out the application, it says, have you ever been in the military? And you have to say no, because I don't have a DD-214 that says I put in my 20. We're not allowed that. So I think that is...
What year did you retire?
2006.
Okay.
So I think that's a big disservice
It is.
to
I
our
agree.
reservists
Yeah.
who put the 20 in.
Mhm.
You know, I understand the 3 years, 6 years,
Mhm.
you know, that's not the whole
Mhm.
20.
Mhm.
You know, and being by that telephone, and the whole family for 15 years is in an uproar. I think it's harder for the women to leave than the men. I don't know,
Yeah.
because I know at Desert Storm, when I was in communications, it seemed like most of the gals, as soon as their time was up, they were out of there.
Mm.
Because now it was full realization could be called up.
Mhm.
And so they had younger families and they couldn't leave.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for, what was your name? Sorry.
Renee?
Renee. Thanks, Renee, for being here. Thank you for your service to Iowa and to our country. Joe's going to hook you up right here.
We got honorary status.
This is something, to be very honest, I thought that has already been addressed just in the last few years. I'm going to go back and double check that because you're exactly right. When we have guardsmen and women and reservists who put in your 20 years ready to be called up at any moment to respond to a natural disaster or need in your home state, or if the call from the country comes, you got to go. And you should be honored and thanked for your service as a veteran and recognized as such. I want to comment briefly on another point that you raised that I think is really important, that over these last almost 20 years, we have seen a significant increase in escalation, kind of a change in posture for our National Guard and reserves, frankly, because we've seen how the active component has been stretched so thin that they've got to draw from the reserves and then draw from the National Guard in order to fill the gap. At one point, during our deployment to Iraq in 2005, when you looked at the makeup of the troops that were deployed to Iraq at that time, the majority of them were National Guardsmen. We outnumbered the active component at that point in time. There's a lot that's changed since then, and how are we training? How are we maintaining a ready force? Where are the resources going? What is being shortchanged in the process? So this is yet another one of those consequences of continuing to wage wars that do not serve the interest of our country, that undermine our national security, that make the American people less safe, and take a tremendous toll in so many ways. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my name is Deb. I'm a veteran, but I
Thank you.
am a Vietnam
Oh,
era
wow.
veteran.
What branch
Um,
of service were you in?
I was in the Army,
Okay.
but only for 3 years,
Okay.
and then I was in reserves. But
Okay.
that's not the point. My point is right now, how do you feel about what's happening in Syria right
Yeah.
now?
Yeah, thanks. I just put out a statement on this morning just before coming here. First of all, how many of you think that Trump is bringing our troops home from Syria? He's not. That's exactly right. He's not making this move to bring our troops home from Syria. He's just pulled our troops off of that northern border in the northern part of Syria, moved them south, essentially laying down an invitation to Turkey's Erdogan to come in and slaughter the Kurds. Look, President Trump has lied. He and his administration have lied to the Kurds, saying, hey, look, we're going to work with you, we're going to support you, we're going to be here for you, but you're not allowed to work out any kind of security agreement or negotiate with or reconcile with the Syrian government. And now we're in a place where Trump has pulled our troops away from the Kurds. And he is complicit. He is complicit in what has just begun this morning, in this slaughter that's taking place. And look, really what this is, when you look at how did we get to this position, why are we here in this moment now? It's because of warmongers in Washington from both political parties who have and continue to support a regime change war in Syria, and Trump's failure to stop it. Yeah.
So how would you wind down some of these wars, like in the Middle East? And what about, taking the military-industrial complex, taking those efforts into other things like, green energy and so forth?
Yeah. This is a unique role that the Commander-in-Chief has. These are things that I've been speaking out about and trying to do while I've served as a member of Congress. But as Commander-in-Chief, you have the ability to actually bring our troops home. We've got to bring our troops home from Afghanistan. We should have brought them home a long time ago. Right now, we still as taxpayers are spending $4 billion every month in Afghanistan. $4 billion. And that expense is coming both from the DoD, Department of State, and a number of other agencies. Unfortunately, Afghanistan's dealing with a lot of corruption within their own government. So we don't even know where are those dollars actually getting to the Afghan people who we're trying to help? Most of them, I believe, are not. There's different reports and assessments and audits that have been done pointing out that corruption, that only the Afghan people can demand change to fix that and to improve the situation there. So looking at where all of our troops are, looking and making the security assessments and bringing our troops home if they're not serving on missions that actually serve our national security interests. The cost of war that we're talking about is not only contained within the Department of Defense budget, but there are expenses that are going into these ongoing conflicts and the follow-on nation building across many other departments within our government. So taking the resources, once we stop these expenditures, bring down the cost, and instead rededicate them towards serving the real needs that we have. If you remember back when the Cold War, when the original Cold War had ended, there was a lot of talk about the peace dividend that was created then, right? This is what I'm talking about here. When we end these regime change wars, make sure that we're not entering any new ones, work to end this new Cold War and arms race, we are creating a peace dividend of our taxpayer dollars that will go towards meeting the many and urgent pressing needs of our people. We'll come to you next.
Oh, cool. There's a kind of a famous interview with General Wesley Clark. If you remember him, he was the head of NATO or something.
He was the Supreme Allied Commander.
Yeah, so
that's quite a title, isn't it?
Yeah, there was a famous interview with him on Amy Goodwin, and he said that after 9/11, he went back to go visit his buddies at the Pentagon, and they pulled him down into the office, and he goes, "What's this? We're going into Afghanistan, and now we're maybe going into Iraq." And his buddies pulled him down into the office, and they go, "That's not all. You should see the plan." And it was like 7 countries in the next 20 years. You familiar with the plan? Yeah. Yeah, and the list was, Iraq, Syria, Somalia, and finally Iran. And, I thought, oh, that's the plan. Well, it didn't make any difference whether we had Obama. It didn't make any difference whether we had Bush, Cheney. And I'm kind of thinking Trump, I don't know whether he's with the plan or not. I don't think you are.
I'm not.
That's why
I'm aware of the plan and I'm not with it.
That's why I like you.
Thank you. I don't know if I've seen that interview with Wes Clark, but I've seen different interviews with other folks talking about this, and this was something that was also documented and talked about in the movie Vice that came out a little while ago, pointing out, kind of predetermining where are the oil resources and what do we got to do to get them. Really, what it came down to. Here's what sets me apart, and you're right. We've seen Democrat and Republican administrations, I think, who well-intentioned went in wanting to make some of these changes that we're talking about, but end up bowing to the influence of the foreign policy establishment in Washington and the military-industrial complex, and they end up continuing out, as you called it, this plan, continuing out these same destructive policies that are ultimately undermining the interests of our country and our people. Here's the difference between me and the rest of them, and I would say the vast majority of people who are running for president right now, is the experience and the depth of understanding that I bring to these issues, to the situation at large, and the conviction that will allow me to carry out this sea change in our foreign policy, to actually, one of the first things I'll do if elected as president is call for a summit between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China to begin to de-escalate tensions, North Korea, de-escalate these tensions, to walk us back away from the brink of nuclear catastrophe, begin to see how we can put the pieces together to both restore some of the treaties that have been eroded or either eroded or completely torn up and thrown in the trash, and see how we can work as a leader to be a force for good in the world, to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons and work us towards a future where no one has to live in fear of a nuclear attack, nuclear catastrophe coming at any moment. The stakes are very real. They're real for every one of us. This is why I'm running for president, because this change needs to take place, and I have the experience and the understanding and the credibility to make it happen. Thanks.
Last question.
When I was in high school, my government teacher told me something that's always resonated with me, and I quote, "If you don't vote, you don't have a valid reason to complain." I'm going to take a wild guess everybody here today believes that. I'm going to take a wild guess. How do you go about convincing people that think, government, that their vote doesn't matter and that the system is corrupt?
In Hawaii, there's actually a bumper sticker that you'll see on a lot of cars that says, "No vote, no grumble." Simple, but true. No vote, no grumble. I don't want to hear it. Unless you're a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. People who think that their voices are not being heard through our current political system and that there's corruption within our system, they're right. They're not wrong. The reason why so many people have been staying home, who've been saying, you know what, I'm not going to bother. I'm not going to go and spend that time to go and cast my vote. I'm not going to even pay attention to politics because the system is rigged. But here's the thing. We are the only ones who can fix it. We are the only ones who can fix it. You can't point your fingers left and right and say, well, it's someone else's problem. It's their fault. It's their fault. It's their fault. They got to get their act together. I wish they cared more. I wish they did more. I wish they did better for us. No. In this representative democracy, this positive change, this rooting out of this government of, by, and for the rich and powerful only happens if we make it happen. If we allow these forces who are only interested in serving themselves and their own selfish interests or their own profits or their bottom line to take over our government because we don't get involved, because we don't vote for leaders who are focused on service, putting service above self, then we're part of the problem. So that's the message that I would share with anyone and everyone who feels like they have no reason to get involved in this beautiful exercise of democracy, is that think about the basic things that you care about in your life, the people who you love, the problems that you identify and you wish that someone would do something about it. Well, the very, very, very minimum that every one of us must do is to make sure that our voice is heard by casting our vote. Thank you. All right, you're the last one.
I find the prospect of extreme climate change very disturbing.
Yeah.
I think we need to shift our energy away from what we're doing. There seems to be a lot of get every last nickel out of petroleum.
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Dennis. It is a big one, but it is an important one. I want to broaden it a little bit beyond even what you're talking about. The changes in the climate and the environmental threats that we face are critical, and we're seeing those impacts both along the coasts of our country, in the middle of our country, in the north and the south. Almost no one is being untouched by this. There are very real policy changes that we need to make to help address this, but I think so we start, I agree, we start by making sure we're transitioning off of fossil fuels, ending the nearly $30 billion that we as taxpayers give to these big fossil fuel corporations every year, and instead direct it towards making the kinds of investments in a clean, sustainable, renewable energy economy future that we need. But we've got to look beyond that, both to the choices that every one of us makes in our own lives, how each of us can help contribute to be a part of the solution, but also we look to things like agriculture. We look to, some of the problems that we're seeing along the coastline, my home state of Hawaii and states like Florida, where we're seeing the water, the ocean quality changing, marine life dying off, coral reef dying off. We're seeing, huge amounts of the red plumes of algae that are coming in and killing everything off. This is happening because of a huge amount of runoff, toxic runoff, and overwhelming use of pesticides in agriculture and in farms that are washing down out to the ocean and creating this effect. So we've got to look at every single contributing factor to these environmental threats and see how can we, bottom line, let's get rid of the divides that we're seeing between the climate believers and the climate deniers who are so busy screaming at each other that we're not actually solving the problem. Let's take that away and actually focus on some of the things that are essential for all of us to just exist and live. Clean water, clean air, a safe place where we, our families, our kids, their kids, and their kids, and their kids will be able to call home. Let's just start there. And when we're having a conversation there, we can overcome some of these divides that are standing in the way of our making the kind of progress towards a future that we're talking about. The second thing is exercising the global leadership to take on these challenges that's necessary, that we haven't seen now since 2016. To go beyond, yes, we need to re-enter the Paris Climate Accords, but we've got to do a whole lot more than that. Being able to lead with a foreign policy based on cooperation rather than conflict provides the opportunity for us to exercise diplomacy, to work out the differences that we have with other countries like China and Russia, while also creating the space and the opportunity for us to work with them on things like climate change that are necessary if we're serious about taking a global, coordinated approach to solve this global challenge. Thank you. I wish we had more time. Thank you so much for spending your little bit of your afternoon with us here. We'll have a few minutes if anyone wants to just come and say a quick hello personally, or if you want to take a quick photo before we take off. I would love to be able to meet you. Thank you so much. Thanks to Steve and Kurt for the sound today. Thank you so much. We got Chris. You got a little protege there. Thank you, Chris.